Welcome to the debate. Today we are diving into really a foundational question about the U.S. legislative branch, about Congress, and we have the benefit, I think, of viewing this institution through two lenses. The enduring foundational mandates laid out in Article 1 of the Constitution, and then the massive, really complex operational reality we see today, particularly through platforms like Congress.gov. And the tension between these two, well, it really defines its modern function. So, the central question before us is this. Is the functional essence of the U.S. legislative branch defined primarily by those structural mandates of Article 1, or is it really defined now by the complex, evolving institutional infrastructure that's required to manage modern legislative activity? I'm going to argue that the dynamic operational infrastructure and, modern information management systems, they are now the defining essence of Congress.
And I come at it from a different angle. I maintain that the core functionality, the actual grant of authority, and the ultimate limits of Congress remain fundamentally rooted in the, let's say, fixed structural mandates established way back in Article 1 of 1787. The operational details, no matter how intricate or, technologically sophisticated they get, they're simply the logistical servants of a fixed legal master.
Okay, I recognize the clarity of the constitutional text, I do, but I think that perspective kind of misses the sheer magnitude of the 21st century governing challenge. The complexity, the scale of modern lawmaking necessitates that the operational infrastructure becomes the definition of the institution today. I mean, we're currently operating in the specific context of the 119th Congress, right? 2025, 2026. Its function isn't abstract. It's dictated by immediate, time-sensitive details.
Like what, specifically?
Well, think about current leaders. Speaker Mike Johnson, Majority Leader John Thune. They're only effective until the next election, or maybe some internal challenge. We're guided by precise scheduling, like the Senate and House next meeting schedule for October 6, 2025. These specific, constantly shifting deadlines, agendas, the immediate needs for leadership. That's the reality of legislative power today. And this reality, it's managed by sophisticated information control. We track, hundreds of specific bills, instantly categorize detailed communications, things labeled like EC 622.8 or PT 83. These are the real minutiae of governance. We rely so heavily on expert nonpartisan analysis, like comprehensive CRS products and specialized law library reports, just to even understand the scope of policy. Without these systems, without this level of specificity and institutional self-awareness, there's really no actual governance happening. The infrastructure isn't just a tool. I think it's the engine that converts that constitutional mandate into messy, complex political action.
I'd push back a little on that idea that, shifting leadership or the immediacy of an October 6th meeting defines the institution. To me, those details feel more like noise around a fixed signal. They merely serve the fundamental architecture established in 1787. The legislative power is vested, that's the word the Constitution uses, solely in the Congress, which consists of a Senate and House of Representatives, as dictated by Article 1, Section 1. This foundational, non-negotiable bicameral structure dictates every operational requirement you just mentioned.
With the scale,
Well, consider the basic framework that no system, no technology can ever circumvent. Representatives are chosen every second year. Senators serve 6-year, staggered terms, divided into 3 classes. Those tenure and rotation rules, they define the entire rhythm of American politics. Even the most powerful functions are structurally defined. The House has the sole power of impeachment. The Senate has the sole power to try all impeachments. These constraints are absolute. They determine the institution's authority regardless of the technology used. The Constitution provides the substance, the purpose, and the boundaries. The operational infrastructure is, it's really just the packaging used to deliver it today.
Okay, let's maybe move our discussion then to a core structural disagreement, defining legislative authority and process. You claim the operational systems provide the effective authority, but I hear you saying the rules for legislative function are fixed, absolute barriers that the technology simply must obey.
They are fixed in law, absolutely. Article 1, Section 7 ensures that all bills for raising revenue must originate in the House. No operational necessity, no fancy tracking system can override that fundamental allocation of fiscal power. Similarly, the exact procedure for overriding a presidential veto requiring 2/3 of both houses, that's a fixed procedural rail. These constitutional constraints define the legal flow of authority. Congress.gov, well, it merely monitors the journey along those rails. It doesn't build them.
While I certainly acknowledge those foundational constitutional rules, I still maintain that today, the effect of authority, the actual ability to act and govern in this world of incredible complexity, lies in the systems that manage that process and make it transparent, understandable, and, actionable. If Congress can't successfully navigate its own internal complexity, those constitutional mandates are, well, they're rendered inert, aren't they?
How so?
Think about the sheer volume of statute. Lawmakers today rely almost entirely on advanced search capabilities to find and apply specific legal texts. We must be able to search by chamber of origin, specific report types, or critical statutes like 90 Stat 2495 or 5 USC 801. These statutes govern everything from federal agency rulemaking to judicial review. Without tools to instantly index, locate, and cross-reference this immense body of law, how can the current 119th Congress even know what the law is? Real-time tracking of legislative activity via the congressional record and roll call votes is what translates the mandate for lawmaking into actual functional governance.
I'm still not quite convinced by the argument that the ability to search constitutes authority. It feels like you're conflating complexity with power, perhaps? The complexity of tracking systems like those on Congress.gov exists precisely to ensure public accountability and compliance with those foundational mandates, not to replace them.
But the scale of it.
Well, take an example. Article 1, Section 5 requires that the yeas and nays of members on any question be entered in the journal upon the desire of 1/5 of those present. That constitutional requirement, drafted centuries ago, is what forces the development of modern electronic roll call vote tracking systems. The technology serves the constitutional requirement for transparency. The constitutional requirement isn't suddenly defined by the database used to fulfill it.
That's a fair point regarding transparency serving the mandate. But isn't the sheer scale of the servitude, if you will, proof of my position? If the infrastructure is merely a servant, it's now a servant of such incredible size and intricacy that it almost defines the household. The sheer volume of modern lawmaking means that the logistics of verification have become the central, daily operational focus. So, if we agree that the complexity is necessary for governance, let's shift focus slightly to the non-lawmaking activities. My second point is about institutional limits versus institutional maintenance. The sheer breadth of the Congress.gov infrastructure, I think, demonstrates that the primary effort of the institution has moved far beyond the simple structure outlined in 1787. Its complexity today is focused on managing interbranch relationships and maintaining this vast institutional memory.
Okay.
When I look at Congress.gov, what I see is massive administrative overhead. We have systems dedicated to tracking executive nominations, referred to by specific PN numbers, like PN4, PN1633-2, treaty documents like 115-3, and the constant flow of interbranch and administrative communications, EC, PM, PARM numbers. These are not primarily about passing a new bill. They are the administrative, almost bureaucratic, non-law-making tasks that define the daily institutional life of the legislative branch. This constant maintenance, driven by the need for public access and accountability across all three branches, is the modern definition of Congress, an institution dedicated as much to self-preservation and bureaucratic management as it is to actual legislation.
I find that description highly problematic, actually. I would argue these are not merely maintenance tasks. They are direct, enumerated exercises of constitutionally defined power, which are immediately and structurally limited by Article 1, Section 9 and 10. The fundamental definition of Congress isn't found in the volume of its administrative overhead, but in the structural power it absolutely cannot exert. The denial of power is the ultimate structural limit.
What specific denials are you emphasizing there?
For instance, Congress is specifically restricted from suspending the writ of habeas corpus, except in cases of rebellion or invasion. That's a huge limit. It's absolutely prohibited from passing a bill of attainder or ex post facto law. These prohibitions are absolute, they're immutable, and they're foundational. They define the boundaries of the institution irrespective of its technological capacity to track some PN number. When an institution's core is defined by what it is legally barred from doing, its fixed structure holds the ultimate power, not its filing system.
I recognize the compelling nature of those structural denials. Yes, they establish the limits of sovereignty. However, the Constitution itself, I think, anticipates and even justifies the dynamic operational evolution that necessitates the administrative infrastructure we see today. I'm just not convinced the institution is defined solely by its fixed limits.
How does it anticipate that?
Well, have you considered Article 1, Section 4? It gives Congress the power to make or alter the times, places, and manner of holding elections, except for choosing senators, which was later amended, of course. This clause seems crucial because it demonstrates that the framers understood that the institution would need the inherent capacity to dynamically regulate its own operational parameters based on the changing demands of the times and geography. The current infrastructure, from managing complex election rules to providing instant treaty tracking, is simply the massive, modern execution of that original capacity for dynamic self-regulation that was baked right into the document. The infrastructure isn't an aberration, it's perhaps a mandated adaptation.
That is an excellent point about Congress's operational latitude to define its own rules of procedure, its own manner of operating. However, the latitude granted in Section 4 is, I would argue, designed to support the established House and Senate structures defined back in Sections 2 and 3. The 2-year terms, the age minimums, the specific powers, it wasn't meant to somehow redefine the body itself. The essential makeup is the definition. The operational details, including the management of elections, merely ensure that those elections fulfill the fixed constitutional definitions of the office. The mechanism, however complex, remains subservient to the structure it is meant to populate.
Well, we have covered substantial ground, I think, highlighting this inherent tension between the enduring constitutional blueprint and the complex living reality of the modern institution. I still reassert my position that while Article 1 provides the legal chassis, the functional, defining essence of the legislative branch today is inseparable from its detailed dynamic operational tools. The daily reality of governance involves tracking specific current leaders, managing these massive data streams of specialized reports, and executing against immediate deadlines. This just demands an institutional complexity far exceeding the basic structure drafted back in the 18th century. That operational complexity, I believe, is the definition of modern legislative power.
And I, in turn, reassert that the ultimate source of authority, the fixed, non-negotiable procedures for passing law, the specific powers denied in Section 9, and the very definition of a bicameral legislature, these are the immutable constitutional facts that define Congress across time. Every piece of technology, every administrative tracking number, every specialized report ultimately exists simply to realize and ensure compliance with those foundational, unchanging constraints. The architecture is the lasting function.
So, a complete understanding of the legislative branch, then, really demands appreciation for both the foundational 1787 document that grants and limits power, and the complex, evolving infrastructure represented so clearly by Congress.gov, which is necessary to execute those powers in the present day.
Indeed. And the listener is left to weigh which element holds the truly defining influence over the institution today. Is it the fixed constitutional architecture that dictates what must be done, or perhaps the dynamic operational machinery that determines how and maybe if it can actually be accomplished effectively in the 21st century?